Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to update you guys on what is going on with the migrant crisis in the city of New York, because things have taken a turn for the worse. Very similar to what we saw in the city of Chicago when the snow started coming down. Just like the Starks have told us with their words, winter is coming.
Winter is coming.
It has started to get really cold in the city of New York, and that is putting an undue burden on our city's shelters, and it seems like your average everyday homeless person is being left out. But worse, the situation is starting to get violent, and there are people being killed in and around these shelters because there's so many migrants taking them up. But before we get into that, before we dive into this particular issue, I want to thank everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. So, we got to break down what's going on in the city of New York really quickly so you can understand the context in which this is all being understood in. So, in the city of New York, our woke progressives going back years, not just Mayor Eric Adams, have designated that people have a right to shelter. What that means is that you can go to a government official, ask for shelter, and that should be provided to you. Now, for a long time, this was not a major issue in the city of New York. And this is because, compared to major cities on the west coast of this nation, New York had relatively few homeless population in comparison to their shelters. I believe during the de Blasio administration, we had something like shelter for 98% of the homeless population. So in winter storms, we would only have to provide hotels or something like that for just 2% of the homeless population. And in general, homeless people in the city of New York, like many places across this country, do not seek out these shelters on a day-to-day basis. But then fast forward to the Biden administration. Migrants start surging the border. They start requesting to go to New York, and Greg Abbott starts sending migrants to New York, and all of a sudden, all of our systems are overloaded. We're getting report after report of homeless people getting tossed onto the street for the migrants and not getting resources ahead of them, including poor people that were in housing that weren't necessarily homeless, getting cheated out of their Thanksgiving meals, again, for the migrants getting there before them. Well, now, all of a sudden, it's snowing, so if you're a migrant and you've been pushed out of a particular shelter because there's no room for you, like the Watson Hotel situation, you're being evicted and you decided that you didn't want to go to the shelter because the shelter's not good enough for you, all of a sudden, there is an urgent need to shelter those people. And when you have a bunch of people crowding around for scarce resources, violence is starting to pop off, and now we've seen a couple of situations, one described as a melee, like in the open, and one where there was a stabbing where people appear to be fighting over resources. And guess what? The average homeless New York citizen seems to be the person most left out by this.
Arthur, well, right now it's cold out here, it's windy, it's wet. During this kind of weather, the most vulnerable are most at risk. Here in New York City, that includes migrants and the homeless population, and that can translate into a range of emotions. We saw evidence of that here earlier today.
So this is described by the local news affiliate as a range of emotions just going wild, but in reality, I just explained to you what is actually going on. We were set up for enough shelters for our homeless population, or thereabouts, for situations like this when the weather gets bad. Then all of a sudden a surge of migrants came in because we're not doing anything about the border, and because these migrants are coming because of the right to shelter largely, this has created a problem, make no mistake about it.
Volunteers at Tompkins Square Park are helping migrants get some things that could offer a little comfort in the face of the harsh weather in the forecast tonight.
They hand us some food and this to keep us warm because it's very cold out here.
So I just want to point something out to people out there in the audience, and that is the fact that they chose to interview this particular migrant for this particular segment, because when a lot of people think about the migrant crisis, they think they're coming through the Mexican border, therefore they might be Mexican, or bare minimum, at least Hispanic, from Latin America, likely from Venezuela, if you have a little bit more information. However, a lot of people don't realize that the crisis has gotten so ridiculous, the way to abuse our asylum system is so out there in the public, that now we're getting people from all parts of the world landing in Latin America, coming up through the Mexican border, walking right up to a processing center and claiming that they need asylum because they're under threat in their home country. And in fact, if you actually watch the video where I was at the Arizona airport with Nuance Bro and Tony, who is the head of Current Revolt, the Texas paper of record, you will not be surprised to find out that this immigrant is not only from Africa, but he's actually from Guinea in particular.
This man from Guinea, West Africa, is one of the many asylum seekers in New York City now facing uncertainty as shelters are at capacity.
Now, oftentimes when I talk about asylum fraud, when I talk about the need for a policy like Remain in Mexico, which is from the Trump administration, it might be the best immigration policy ever instituted solely on its own in the last 20 years in American history. I talk about the fact that people come from Venezuela and they pass through about 6 different countries where they could easily claim asylum in, because yes, you can claim asylum in any of these Latin American countries, yet they don't do so because they're economic migrants. Well, multiply that by 10 and realize that we're talking about somebody from Guinea, somebody from Africa, that is managing to make their way to Latin America, go through even more countries, not only the countries that they pass through from Africa, but those in Latin America, and using that as a way to claim asylum, still getting approval, still getting through, as we showed by the documents in that previous video with the first-hand reporting from Nuance Bro, and then they end up in New York City and now they're complaining about the cold weather. The mere fact that this person right here in particular is the one being interviewed, he is the guy talking about how it's too cold in New York City, talking about how there's not enough resources, should be the picture-perfect example of why we shouldn't allow asylum fraud to run rampant in our country. This guy could have claimed asylum in almost any other place along his route, his very long route to the United States of America, but not only did he not do that, but he came all the way to New York City specifically for the right to shelter, all the way to New York City specifically because they give out welfare benefits to illegal immigrants, to people who break our laws, because he knew he would be protected here. What we are doing is drawing people in with magnets, and guess what? Those magnets are stronger than we could have possibly imagined, because we got a guy from Guinea complaining about the weather in New York City and about the perks that he wants.
On a night like this, that uncertainty can create a range of emotions, including fear. And you're not used to this weather, right?
We are not. This is a strange environment.
Look, I've made it clear on this channel multiple times that I do not hate the people that are trying to come to the United States. I understand that the United States of America is an amazing place. It is a land of opportunity. I understand why people would want to come here. I think the blame should be directed solely at those responsible, those who are incentivizing this kind of behavior, specifically the federal government, for refusing to enforce their immigration laws, for taking away sensible immigration policy like what was called Remain in Mexico, which states that if you pass through a country where you can claim asylum and you don't claim asylum there, you're not going to get a free pass to come to the United States of America. That being said, I find it incredibly annoying and obnoxious when I hear the local news reporter saying, you're not used to this weather, you poor sad sack, oh my god, we feel so bad for you. No, I don't feel bad for this person. I want this person to experience the warmth like he felt back in Guinea, and the best way for him to do so is to get a plane ticket and go back to Guinea. This is ridiculous and absurd. The idea that it's just like, haha, they're out there in the cold doesn't make any sense, especially when you think about the fact that we have our own homeless population here in the city of New York, and these people are getting the short end of the stick when it comes to being sheltered during this bad weather. Now, luckily, over the course of this particular weekend, we did not see the crazy snow that was expected. We got a little bit of snow, a little bit of freezing rain. It was pretty bad, but this is nothing compared to how bad it can actually get, and the people who deserve the relief first are the people who fell through the cracks of our systems that are actually citizens of the United States and residents of the city of New York. We hear all this talk about how we got to protect the homeless. The hobos need everything from the government. Well, guess who's taking the resources from the hobos, and guess who's complaining about it because the weather isn't like how it was back in Africa.
Earlier today, emotions were high not too far from the park in front of the former St. Bridget's School, now operating as a shelter reentry center for migrants during this crisis, as limits on shelter stays were imposed by the city months ago.
Now look, I hate to go into this dark territory, but we need to go into this dark territory. The fact of the matter is, your average homeless person, or a huge portion of the homeless population in the city of New York, are people who are mentally ill, potentially people who are U.S. service members that fell through the cracks of the VA system. These are not the kind of people that have the competence, nor the consistency, nor the discipline to line up for hours outside of all of these shelters. So what you're seeing right here is migrants quite literally take the positions of people who are homeless, who are mentally ill, who need the care the most, and this is how our city works. This is how our country works. You come to this country, you defraud our system, you get treated better than if you served our country the proper way, and you happen to have mental conditions resulting from that service.
There are literally hundreds every day lined up around the block, all the way to the next block and around the corner.
This morning, ahead of the storm and the forecast, police were called after an altercation broke out. The NYPD says 2 officers sustained minor injuries and 2 migrants are facing several charges now, including resisting arrest. According to a witness, it had to do with someone cutting the line.
Now look, cutting the line is quite annoying, and we all understand that, but the fact that fights are breaking out amongst the migrants for resources that should not be theirs in the first place, I find to be particularly obnoxious. Now, they were just charged with resisting arrest because, of course, they were. God forbid DA Alvin Bragg actually charged them with the crimes that they should be charged with for assaulting officers, because we have 2 particular injuries in this particular case. But you know what? At least it's something, although they did just end up in a jail cell getting 3 squares a day, so maybe they ended up achieving their result, and skipping the line has more promise than it actually should. But what happened to the idea that if you are a guest in this country, that you should follow the law? It's bad enough that they're stealing resources from the homeless on a cold day where many might freeze to death, but the fact of the matter is they're fighting over these resources, and then they're getting treated with kid gloves. They're getting a nice slap on the wrist, bail reform in full effect, and they will be out on the streets to slug each other over resources that shouldn't be theirs in the first place by night's end, by tomorrow morning, or even a couple of hours after their arrests. Why even bother processing them? We're a sanctuary city, we're a sanctuary state. We can't report their bad behavior to ICE so that they can be sent back to their home country. We just gotta deal with it, suck it up, and let them commit as many crimes as they want to. Now, to be clear, even these illegal immigrants, even these asylum fraudsters, aren't committing as much crimes as other demographics in the United States of America, but those demographics happen to be American citizens, so even if they technically bring down the crime rate a little bit by being here, that doesn't mean that we should tolerate this behavior from people who are breaking the law to even be here in the first place.
The Department of Homeless Services says tonight a Code Blue is in place, meaning if you need a warm bed, you should be able to access one. But with the overflow in shelters between the migrant population and the homeless in New York City, there are doubts. In a statement from Housing Justice for All, thousands of our homeless neighbors, including families and children, will be forced to endure freezing temperatures on the streets today. Some may die.
So this should be obvious to everyone, but an organization called Housing Justice for All should be treated with an insane degree of skepticism. This is obviously a radical progressive organization that believes in the right to housing. In fact, they probably lobbied for the magnet that lured so many migrants here in the first place. But the fact of the matter is, the math before the migrant crisis is what it is, and we talk about how they're not building shelters fast enough, and even when they do build the shelters, the migrants don't want to go there because they have a divine right to stay at the Watson Hotel and a divine right to stay for free in the most luxury apartments in the world on Billionaires Row.
Volunteer advocates argue the city should put these migrants in some of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the world.
He could have easily, along with Governor Hochul, opened up all the vacant luxury apartments. We are on 57th Street right now. This is Billionaires Row. Half of the super towers on this street are empty.
Of course, that begs the question, who would pay for all those luxury apartments?
So you can understand why there is definitely a problem. But guess what? They actually got significantly worse, because in this particular instance, it was only described as a melee. We've seen fights break out at these shelters over and over again, but there was actually a stabbing. Somebody ended up dying over a line issue or whatever, and this is another problem that we have to deal with this migrant population.
Safety concerns tonight for migrants after a man was stabbed to death at the migrant shelter on Randall's Island, and 2 other migrants were arrested in a separate incident.
So right here, you heard that on Randall's Island, which has basically been given over to the migrants for a shelter, there was a fatal stabbing. You also heard about 2 other arrests in a separate instance, again at the migrant shelter. They're fighting amongst themselves. And then the news segment has the balls, the audacity to lead off with the police presence isn't making the migrants feel all that much safer.
A police presence outside the migrant shelter on Randall's Island isn't helping some feel safer after a fatal stabbing.
And then they go to the migrants who are going to say, oh, well, we don't want the cops here because I guess they have a divine right to stab each other over the resources that should be going to the most vulnerable New Yorkers among us. But I guess, whatever, how dare the police show up, defund the police, give it to the migrants, and you think that's a joke, but that's actually public policy in the city of New York if you look at Eric Adams' budget.
When I returned, the first thing I heard, the comments they were saying was a murder, says this asylum seeker from Venezuela who has been staying here for about a month. ¿Tú tienes miedo? I asked if she's afraid. She responded every day because here it's not safe.
So they interview this particular woman. She feels uncomfortable, unsafe on the Randall's Island shelter, and that is understandable because a lot of these shelters are very disproportionately male, and reportedly this particular issue seemed to be over a woman, not this one in particular, and that would lead me to feel uncomfortable living amongst all these people. However, I want to fact check the local news affiliate for claiming that she is an asylum seeker. Need I say it again? There are plenty of countries between Venezuela and the United States of America that this person could have sought asylum in, yet she did not do so because she is in reality an economic migrant. And to be clear, I'm not even saying that economic migrants from Venezuela in particular would make bad Americans. In fact, I actually believe the opposite is the case. People fleeing socialist countries, communist countries, tend to make excellent Americans. They tend to have great values and all that, but guess what? The rules apply in the way that they apply, and we cannot let these people crowd out legitimate asylum seekers, even if there is a better than not chance that her from Venezuela would make a better American than somebody who is a straight up economic migrant from Guinea or anywhere else on the map that is ending up at our southern border.
The NYPD responded to a 911 call just after 7:30 Saturday evening. Police say a man in his 20s was stabbed in the chest. He was taken to a hospital where he died. A male suspect is in police custody. Investigators say it started with a dispute inside the cafeteria at the shelter.
Now, this particular segment actually refers back to the 2 other people that were arrested in East Village, which is at the processing center, and essentially the situation that has gone down in the city of New York is that they tried to lift the number of days that you could stay at the shelters in order to cater to the migrants. However, courts have decided that no, the limits of 30 days for singles and 60 days for families need to stay, and if these people want to get to new shelters, they have to go to that processing center and be reassigned, because we cannot just have these people clog up all of the space that is supposed to be reserved for citizens in the city of New York, and this has led to a disaster situation. And I'm not saying that you should let the migrants stay forever in perpetuity, but what I am saying is that we should not have these migrants here in the first place. Obviously, this is stressing the system. Obviously, this is creating problems, and whether woke politicians want to admit it or not, it is their policies that are drawing in these migrants, and blaming Texas is not a solution. And their policies nationally of not guarding the border, letting these people in, is also a major problem. Now, you're going to hear a lot about how the Republican Party is blocking funding for processing at the border, the $14 billion number, but the thing is, that particular funding is for processing, to let more people in more quickly, and that is not going to solve the problem. It's going to exacerbate it. It's going to create a better additional magnet for these migrants, and once they know we're spending more money on letting people in, guess what? More people are going to go in. What we need to do is start adjudicating these cases, and quickly. We have 3+ million in the backlog. The highest we had in the backlog under the Trump administration was 1.2 million, and this is obviously an unsustainable system. We also need to enforce some version of the Remain in Mexico policy. There is no way that we can deal with the people that pass through 17 different countries in order to get here without having these kind of issues. The fact of the matter is, the American economy is good, it is strong, and people want to come here, and we cannot prioritize people who falsely claim asylum over your people that actually deserve to be here, who have gone through the system in the right way, because that's going to disincentivize people more so from going in the right way. Now, we do hear alternative solutions being put forward. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said, and I think this might even be an old clip, so excuse me for playing it, but it's been recirculating on Twitter, that the solution to the undocumented migrant crisis is to give them documents, aka amnesty for illegal immigrants.
From all parts of the political spectrum, one of the biggest issues that we have when it comes to immigration is the fact that we have an undocumented population. Now, you can fix that by trying to build a wall, or you can fix that by trying to document people and create a path to citizenship.
No, absolutely not. Not even close. That's a terrible idea, and one of the reasons why is just because of what I said before. If we spend more money to process more people in the asylum system, that is going to incentivize more people to come here and falsely claim asylum. If we start legalizing a bunch of people, we give them amnesty, that's going to make people think all they have to do is get in here and wait around here long enough illegally, and eventually they'll be legalized. Every single one of these solutions from the left wing involves incentivizing more people to come forward in the future, which will create more problems in the future. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Maybe you think that immigrants do have a divine right to come here illegally, stab each other at shelters, complain, fight about it, take resources from homeless people. I disagree with it, but make your case down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the migrant crisis going south. Till next time.